So let's dive right in.
Okay.
I want to talk about you a little bit.
Okay.
I want to talk about really starting with your recovery. What does recovery look like for you? And give us a little bit of some backstory that would explain kind of how you got from where you were to where you are now.
Okay. Well, to be doing the services in my hometown where I'm fifth generation, resident of Wyndham, I think has a lot to do with the story that we're telling, especially with what we're doing now. But I grew up in this town, and, I've got a couple generations of St. John's who, my dad, his story was he was about 10, and my grandfather went to get milk, and he didn't see him for 15 years. That's real. My story was I was about 10, and my dad split, and he became homeless for the next 15 years, and we didn't have social media, and I didn't have much contact at all. So I kind of grew up in this town angry, but people don't like angry, right? Our society says you're not really supposed to be or show anger. Yeah. So I didn't know what I was feeling. I was angry, but really I wasn't angry. I was confused. I was sad. I was embarrassed. I was afraid a lot. I was also afraid of what would become of me. So I made some declarations that, I was going to break the cycle of the St. John men, right? Long story short, I became the cycle.
How'd that cycle start for you?
Well, I found relief in using. I found relief in alcohol and drugs. I found relief in fighting. I found relief in risk, anything that had risk. And
specifically relief from what?
Pain.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was really uncomfortable. But I was in a lot of pain. I couldn't describe it. That's what it felt like. And so when I used or I did something that had a lot of risk to it, I felt better. Mm-hmm. And so I tried to figure out how I can do more of that.
Yeah, so, I would imagine pretty quickly that risky behavior, the using, developed into something deeper, right?
Yeah, so I had to really manage alcohol because alcohol and me, it was really obvious and I got consequences. So drugs were less detectable. I could seem to be a little more stable. So, I kind of tried to balance that as best I could. That said, I knew I needed discipline. I knew I was in trouble. I knew I was at risk to really end up in jail or worse, right? So I decided I was going to go in the military and get some discipline, which I did. I did pretty well in the military, but I had a lot of alcohol-related incidents, and I left the military with an honorable discharge. I enjoyed my experience there, but to stay in longer, I was at risk because I drank too much.
Yeah.
So I got out, and I started a career in personal training. I went into bodybuilding, which is powerlifting, and
which you couldn't tell by looking at you now.
Well, it was something that helped me, right? Yeah. It was something that gave me structure, and so I followed that. And I think I competed until I was about 30. Yeah, and I could manage, manage, and control the alcohol and the drugs and the uppers and the downers. Mm-hmm. But a couple years after I stopped competing in bodybuilding, I was hopelessly addicted to OxyContin and Xanax. And, I was selling steel. I was making six-figure income. I had Zoe right around the time that I started using OxyContin, and that quickly took me over. So by the time she was 1, I was already completely hopelessly addicted to it. Turned into a $200 a day habit. I managed that for best I could. It didn't take long before, she was coming up, and I would tell people she was the most important thing. And to me, she was, but she really wasn't, because really I had to get fixed in order to be able to function. So, oxygen, Oxycontin, then it was my daughter or my family and, anything else.
At what point do you think, excuse me, at what point do you think that changed for you? Like, when did your priority shift from Zoe being lower down on that list to her being up at the top?
Well, in the end of '08, the banks collapsed. And I knew I was in trouble because I knew I wasn't going to be able to go pull $200 a day out of my ATM. Or all our steel orders stopped. So I knew something outside of my house of cards was going to blow it up. And I had to have it. I was a slave to it. There's no delay. I mean, anytime that I was delayed of opiates, I would go into withdrawal. And I've been in withdrawal hundreds of times, various degrees of it. But I never got through it, right? I never got through and out. But I was using one time, driving down the road, using on a CD cover, snorting off of a CD cover while I'm driving and Zoe in the back of my car. And at one point, she was just under 4 years old, and she goes, "Dad." And it was this tone, like with urgency and fear. And I looked into the rearview mirror, and she's just looking at me with this face. She didn't say anything else. But what I internalized it was, something's wrong. I'm watching you, Dad, and it's not okay. Something's wrong. That's not right, what she was seeing. And it grabbed me. It grabbed me pretty good. I was calling for treatment after that. And I went to Glen Bay. I took an FMLA from work. I didn't tell anybody what was wrong with me. Nobody really knew. They knew something was very wrong with me, but they didn't know exactly what. I've also got stage 4 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, so I let people believe that it was cancer. It sure looked like it. My organs were shutting down. I was gray. I wasn't going to see 40 years old, or I wasn't going to see much past 40 years old without something changing. So, on February 19th of 2009, I put myself into treatment. I used for a couple of days straight, put myself into treatment. And, the short story is I haven't used yet. I haven't picked up anything since then. I stopped using all mood or mind-altering substances, alcohol, drugs, everything. On February 20th, I had a full day clean, and it took me about a year to feel human again.
So I want to talk about Zoe a little bit. But before we do, can you tell me what those early days of recovery looked like for you?
Yeah.
Like the first couple days you're in Glen Bay,
Yeah,
what did
so
that look like?
it wasn't so bad. It wasn't so bad because they had me on some medication, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, this is going to be okay, I remember leaving there, and they were telling me I needed to stay, and I was like, no, I'm here. I'm leaving. And I still have relationships with those folks that tried to stop me from leaving. But I didn't that day. But after I left, I was raw. I felt like an alien. I felt brittle. I felt hollow inside, like I had a brittle shell. Like physically, it took months for me to feel mostly normal at times. But then you go into this emotional withdrawal where just completely raw. My emotional stability was way off. But for the first time in my life, I was around people. I'd heard that alcoholics stopped drinking. I didn't know any drug addicts that stopped using. So when I started meeting some, there was some hope transferred there, right? So they just kept saying, just try to get through dinner, man. Just try to shrink it down just for today. Just try to get through today. So I started counting days pretty quick and suffering a lot. But there was something inside me deep that knew that what the experience that others were sharing with me was real. And that if it's possible to not use anything and be okay with that, then it was my obligation. It was my responsibility, if it was possible. Because honestly, I went into this and I didn't know that it was even possible for someone like me to not use and be okay with that.
Yeah. So let's talk about Zoe for a second.
Okay.
I know just from my interactions with her, as well as our conversations about her, like, she has obviously played and continues to play a huge part in your recovery. I have a daughter myself, 2.5 years old. And so, like, when I look at her, I just think, man, I want to be the best father, husband, I want to be the best man I can possibly be. And I want to do it for her.
Yeah.
And so, going through recovery, especially those early days, what about Zoe? Was she something that you held on to in those moments of like, oh man, I don't know if I'm going to make it?
Yeah.
Like, talk to me about what she means to you and how she has influenced your recovery.
Well, I've said this before because it's true and it's my story, is I was full of apathy. I didn't really care if I lived. I didn't want to keep repeating what was happening with me. I'd gotten past the point where I felt like I was able to really return normally at all. But I was suicidal. I had a plan and I had means, and I spent a lot of time thinking about it. And there was, in those moments when I was at my weakest, when it was at its strongest, to just say, just be done. Just be done. I would think of what it was like for me as a kid to have a narrative of a dad who was absent, homeless, schizophrenic. It was difficult for me. I didn't want her narrative to be, oh, I'm so sorry about your dad. He was a good guy, but boy, he sure couldn't. It really took him, didn't it? And I didn't want her to have that. So I think that was what when it was at its strongest and I was at my weakest, that was what was sitting there with me. So when I felt it was possible, I got excited, honestly, even though it was really difficult. I was excited because I felt like I was going to do something significant. That's really what I wanted to do. I wanted her to be proud. I remember having a week clean, and my sponsor, Jim Beadle, he showed up at a meeting with his daughter, one of his kids. She was 18 years old, redhead, Sabrina. And he was going to tell his story. And I listened to him tell his story, but I didn't really watch him. I watched her. And he was pretty raw. He was telling it like it was, right? From something that was 20 years earlier when she was, before she was there. She knows him. She knew him the way she knew him in recovery. And he was there for everything, present and available. She watched him. I wanted Zoe to see me that way. I didn't want her to see me the way I saw my dad. So that's what I worked towards. And honestly, for a guy like me, just not picking up, that was something to be proud of because it's difficult. And I wanted to show her that we can do difficult things. I'd done a lot of other things in my life that were difficult, and I was proud of those things. This had me, and I didn't want to be had by it.
Yeah.
I wanted her to see that, we can be honest with people. We can share who we are. We can share our weaknesses with people. Actually, it actually makes us stronger to be able to do that. That's what I learned in recovery early on. So I started practicing that. And, I knew it would take some time for it to come full circle. But, she was 4 when I came into recovery. She's 20. She's proud of her dad.
Yeah, I can tell.
And her dad is proud of her. Mm-hmm. And we've come through it. We've come through a lot. And we've always been in step with each other. I've learned through my recovery to accept her where she's at. And she's learned to accept me and all that comes with that. Mm-hmm. But she's, I mean, she knows what recovery's done for our family. She knows what it's done for her. I mean, she got my clean date tattooed on the back of her neck as her first tattoo.
Yeah, it's huge.
That meant something to her. She knows what it means. Mm-hmm. She knows how it changed her life. Yeah. She knows that she had some other friends who she grew up with who their parents didn't get or stay in recovery, and their life was a lot different. You know, when she looks at me, she can trust what she sees. And that's really what I want most.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm excited. Hopefully we'll have her on here soon.
Yeah, I think that'd be
cool. Ask her some questions about you and get the tea, you know.
She's got stuff to say.
Yeah.
But I think it's good that we talk to people in recovery, because we always talk to people like me who's in recovery, what it's like. You know, I think we should be talking to the families.
Yeah.
Find out what it's like. Not families that are wishing their family would be in recovery, but families who their family is in recovery, what it's like for them, how it's impacted their life. Yeah. Not just the fact that I've been clean. What has that example been like for her, generally speaking, not just specific to drugs and alcohol?
Yeah. One other person I want to talk about, you mentioned Jim Beadle a couple of moments ago. Tell me about Jim and the significance he had in your life and kind of how he still influences you in your recovery today.
Yeah, so Jim passed a few months ago. He had a double lung transplant, and he outlived that expectancy and then some. Jim Beadle was somebody that, you know, I came out of the treatment and I went into the rooms and I went in there with the sticky note solution, which is find a sponsor, pick a home group, work steps, right? Go to meetings. So I remember my first few meetings, I was listening to people, and he happened to be at a meeting in Kent, my second meeting in, and just the gratitude that he had. He was rough around the edges. I was thinking, I'm going to have to tell whoever this mentor is going to be some secrets about me. I'm going to have to be honest with him. So I kind of was looking for a specific type of person, but I needed somebody who gave a shit. And he gave a shit. What it turned out to be for me was so much more than I expected, because typically a sponsor is just a person who helps take you through the step process. There's a lot of expectations as to what a sponsor is, but that's essentially what it is. But for me, I was looking for a father figure my whole life. I was chasing a dad. And Vito became that. You know, he's probably only 10 years older than me. But he'd been through so much. And he cared so much about me. I never had a man really, truly care about me. Not say I care about you, but demonstrate it through his actions. He demonstrated that shit. And for a kid like me, a guy like me, you know, that loyalty is going to run deep for somebody who cares about me. And he did. And he cared enough to be honest with me. He cared enough to be honest with me about me, how he experienced me and my arrogance. And because he cared so much, I was willing to accept it. And it made all the difference. Because my arrogance wasn't really truly arrogance. I didn't think I was better than anybody. I felt less than. And I thought the solution was to feel better than. It just made sense that way. That I would be better, I would feel better if I could just not feel less than. And it turns out humility is feeling the same as, being able to identify with people and find a connection at an equal level rather than a lower or higher level. And that came out through the step work and the efforts that we put in. And that's something that he and I identified with pretty closely, and it solved a lot of problems for us. And it helps me today to solve a lot of problems because I either have a tendency to feel less than or feel better than. But I can solve that problem by feeling same as.
Yeah.
It's a big life lesson for me, and it helps me a lot.
Yeah. He's from the way you talk about him, you know, I never met him, but he seems like someone that lived his life in such a way that like, I would want to emulate that,
Yeah.
you know, like, so how has the way Jim Beadle lived his life affected the way that you live your life now?
So Beto told me early on, all I got to do is bring the want to, right?
Mm-hmm.
I got to be willing. I don't have to know anything. I don't have to do much. I just got to be willing, right? Beto was more willing to help people than I'll ever be.
Yeah.
It just, there's something about it for him that he just would help no matter what. He was so selfless. He gave to his family the same way he gave to anybody that needed his help. People that didn't need his help, he was trying to help.
Mm-hmm.
I would find myself not being the same selflessness to his degree. But I had different skill sets, and I had to learn to utilize those. So I think that's kind of what helped me go into, staying in recovery was being willing to help.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he used to say to me, somebody would ask me to sponsor him. I had like 90 days clean. I'm calling him going, I can't sponsor anybody. I don't know anything. He's like, are you a step ahead of him? I'm like, yeah. He goes, then who the hell are you to not help a suffering
Mm-hmm.
addict? And I'm like, yeah, but there's so many people that are better
Mm-hmm.
that know more, that can be more helpful. He goes, but they asked you.
Mm-hmm.
What am I going to say? The man was always there. He always told me how he felt about me, all the way up to the last conversation, and he demonstrated it. And that means a lot. But he lived his life by the dude was all over the place, man. Yeah, he was a hyperspaz.
Yeah.
But you knew who he was. He was honest, and he shared his experience. What are you going to do? I mean,
Yeah.
he's authentic. Authenticity, man. That dude, you knew who he was,
Mm-hmm.
and you knew what he stood for, and you knew what you were going to get with him. And if he could help, he would. And that's
Yeah.
what I loved about him.